But I'm one of those people who says, do you want to move up a little bit, or does John want to yell? Yeah. Okay. John, you yell. I'm Madeline Hennessy. I'm on the Board of Selectmen, and we all invited you here because we had some questions about the future of aquaculture and just what's going on. And what does the town have to say, if anything, about what happens with aquaculture in the community, in the waters surrounding the community, and what exactly are your intentions, sir? So, if you would kindly come forward and just tell us about aquaculture and your story, and then we'll open it up to questions, and you can grill the man, but politely, of course. He works hard for us.
Welcome. We're going to have a fair amount to cover tonight. A little bit of background. I'm Jon Lewis. I work with the Department of Marine Resources. I've been on this job for 21 years. Prior to moving here, I worked with Alaska Fish and Game as a wildlife research biologist, doing bears, moose, seals, and sea lions. We now have a staff of 7 in the aquaculture program. We work Eastport to Kittery, and we have dealt with salmon farms, cod farms, trout farms, clam farms, oyster farms, urchin farms, seaweed farms, anything farmed along the coast of Maine we've been involved with. I know there are a lot of questions, and I think the only way to really establish things, before I move forward, I want to introduce 2 people. Flora Drury is the 3rd row back there. She is one of our scientists in the aquaculture program. Dana Morse in the green is with Maine Sea Grant. Both of them have been involved with aquaculture, and they may have some comments as we move along. A little bit of background. If you guys want to jump in as I present things, if there are questions, feel free to just jump up, raise your hand, scream out, slap me in the head, whatever you need to get my attention. I'm going to take about 10 to 15 minutes, hopefully, and kind of set some stage and foundation and how the process works, and then we can just have a discussion. I considered showing up here with a PowerPoint presentation and turning my back and looking at my slides, and I thought maybe just a little discussion might be a little better. A little bit of background. I'm going to write down 2 numbers here, and I'll probably come back and refer to them. Okay. What I've written is 6072 and Chapter 2, the light blue pen. We get our aquaculture laws from the Maine legislature, and I continually refer to them as your legislature. They write the laws, and our aquaculture leasing laws are in Title 12, Section 6072, A, B, and C, depending upon what kind of lease we have. For those of you who are unaware, we do not make the laws, we follow the laws, and I'll draw the comparison this way. Legislature might tell us we need to buy a motor vehicle, and it has to have at least 2 doors. Okay? There's the law. Got to have a motor vehicle. Must have 2 doors. The department develops rules which can further define what the law is. So we might say we want 4 doors. It must be 4-wheel drive and a standard transmission. So we can build on what the legislature gives us. As the discussion develops, I'll probably come back to 6072, the laws, and Chapter 2, the main regulations, DMR regulations on leasing. We have 3 different kinds of ways to do farming, but before I get into that, I want to just step on aquaculture a little bit. About 90% of United States seafood is imported. 90%? More than 50% of that is farmed. Okay? Those of you who have spent time on the water, I used a phrase, and I think I've used it in West Bath periodically, and I think it's important to keep note of. I said this in front of our commissioner and deputy commissioner about a year ago when their jaws sort of dropped. I'm the director of the aquaculture program, and I said out loud that aquaculture is a sign of a dismal failure. Of course, jaws dropped. We're paying you to do what? And you're... Remember when we had salmon in the river, we had shrimp in the ocean, we had urchins, we had halibut, we had cod, we had groundfish. We had all these resources available to us. For those of you who are around these resources, you know they're not there anymore. Okay? Many of our communities around the coast of Maine are dependent on a marine economy. Right now, we've got lobstering. That's about it. Lobster forecasts do not look particularly promising over the next 10 years or so. So we've got people who for generations have made livings on the water. Local coastal economies are dependent on the marine environment. And what do? We've got a lot of interest going on right now in aquaculture. To put things in perspective, Flora administers an LPA program, which I'll get into in a minute. Those are the little small 400 square foot licenses that we issue, and I'll get into the distinctions and details of our programs in a minute. But when Flora started, we had, I think, 180 LPAs. We're now over about 450. So there's a tremendous interest, and those of you who live on the river, I probably don't need to tell you that. Primary species that we raise in Maine are salmon, which is almost all down east. It goes from about Blue Hill Bay to Eastport. Two other big ones have been oysters and mussels. People are getting into scallops and seaweed now as well. Okay? Maine has this great distinction of this perception of we have these clear, cold, pristine ocean waters, and that creates a really strong market nationally and internationally. Given a choice between a Maine oyster or a Jersey oyster, people probably take the Maine over the Raritan River, New Jersey oyster. So it is a very good product. A little bit of things here. We have three ways people can farm in the water. LPAs are a license. They are 400 square feet, 20 by 20, 1 by 400, depending upon what your configuration is. You can have up to 4 of them, and they are renewable every year. Harbor master signature is required on this. That is not going to interfere with fishing, navigation, landowner access, other uses of the area, I believe. Feel free to jump in if there are comments. It's a license. It's very small. It's a lot of people starting out. The cost of this is $50. To get 1, you get 4, it's $200. And it's renewable every year. The second way we have for people to get in the water in the vernacular is to call it farming and farms. Experimental leases are a maximum of 4 acres. They are good for 3 years. And the application fee is $100 or $150? $100. Okay? So we're getting a little bit bigger. 400 square feet, 4 acres. Here's a standard lease, and that is available for a 20-year duration. That was recently changed through your legislature in 6072. 20-year duration, it's a $1,500 application fee. Now review process. LPAs, we do not go out and visit the site. We depend on local knowledge of the harbor master. Is the harbor master here? Okay. We depend, we've talked about things a little bit. We depend on that local knowledge of the harbor master. When this was established back in the early 2000s, DMR knew we did not know every nook and cranny of the coast of Maine. So we depend on that local knowledge input. For experimental leases, we're required to visit the site, map the site. We may or may not dive the site. We'll look at proximity to mooring fields, to navigation, etc. We may or may not dive it. Standard lease, we're required to characterize the bottom. So typically we will dive the site. And until a couple of years ago, I could have told you that I dove every standard lease site in the state of Maine. With the people coming on, I can't say that anymore, but I have looked at the video. We do pre-dive surveys of each one of these sites. I'm not going to touch on salmon farms tonight. If somebody wants me to deviate into there for a little bit, I can do that. We have 10 decision criteria given to us under 6072. For a lease to be granted for a standard lease, you have to have an available source of seed. And I frequently say if somebody comes to us and says they'd like to create a blue whale farm, where are you getting the blue whale seed to start your farm? So we have to have available source of seed. The standard, anybody here a lawyer? I was, okay. Correct me if I'm wrong. I have been told that the standard that's used from DMR, and is given to us in 6072, and we've adopted in Chapter 2, is shall not unreasonably interfere with. The reason I asked about attorneys is I've been told that is not an uncommon standard in the practice of law, reasonable and unreasonable. You've heard about reasonable doubt, unreasonable doubt. Our standards shall not unreasonably interfere. So we look at seed, we look at ecology. If somebody is going to damage the environment with what they're proposing, the lease will not be granted, and I'll get into the process a little bit more. It can't interfere with riparian owner ingress and egress. Only the government could use that phrase. It can't interfere with people's access to the shorefront properties. It can't interfere with navigation. It can't interfere with existing fisheries unreasonably. Can't interfere with existing fisheries. Can't interfere with other uses of the area. We've had instances where there's been sailboat racing, kayaking, other waterborne uses of the area. It can't unreasonably interfere with publicly conserved lands. That doesn't mean if your land is in a conservation easement that falls into the publicly conserved lands. It's lands owned by state, federal, or municipal governments. Okay? That's the other one of our criteria. We also have noise, light, and visual impact standards that do not pertain to the experimental lease. So there's 7 criteria here that must be met. There's 10 here. Process. A little bit different process. Somebody would walk in tomorrow and hand us an experimental lease application, and there it is. In 2003, the task force was formed. For our standard lease application, there is a new process. We have a pre-application meeting with a member of the town, selectman or harbor master, and the applicant and a representative from DMR. Just to fill in the harbor master, let them know what's going on, get some feedback from the harbor master. Subsequent to that, we have what's called a scoping session, and that's open to the public. I don't care if you're from the local area or Aroostook County, you can come and ask questions of the applicant during that scoping session. And it's an informal process, no application's been filed yet. So at the end of the scoping session, from what the applicant hears, they may decide to move forward exactly as planned. They may modify their proposal in their mind, what they're thinking, or they may just decide to abandon it based on the results of that public input. After the standard application scoping session is conducted, only then can a person submit an application. Application comes to DMR, we review it for completeness of information, and then we send it out, once it's deemed complete, to riparian landowners, which are shorefront property owners within 1,000 feet of the proposed lease. So they get personal notification. The town gets personal notification. It goes out to state and federal agencies, okay? So we get IF&W involved, DEP involved, parks, conservation. I think those are for the state. From the federal end, anytime an aquaculture operation puts any gear in the water, we're all free to go out, and I won't get into the wisdom of it, but we're all free to go out and toss oysters or clams, wherever we like, on the bottom. Create our own little secret farm. I've drawn the comparison to we're also free to drop dollar bills on the sidewalk all you like. It doesn't mean they're going to be there when you get back. You can farm in this state without any kind of a lease at all, but it's public resource, and you have no protection. Okay? It's like dropping dollar bills on the sidewalk. If you have any kind of gear, bags, cages, lantern nets, ropes, moorings, lines, any kind of gear at all, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers gets involved, and their concern is navigation. One of the things I should mention is the coastal waters of the state of Maine, from mean low water out, are held in public trust. No one owns the coastal waters, okay? They're held in public trust, and it doesn't matter if you're a local resident, or you're from Eastport applying for a lease in Bath, or Bath applying for a lease in Eastport, the playing field is level. State waters, residency is not an issue, okay? There's 2 things on those decision criteria I mentioned that you may have noticed were omitted, and this falls under 6072 again. There are 2 things that are frequently of concern to people, and we are not allowed to address them. The first one is aesthetics, okay? We can no more evaluate aesthetics, I don't want to look at it, it's ugly, than we can evaluate your motor vehicle condition, your tax returns, whatever. We cannot consider aesthetics. It's not one of our decision criteria. The other thing we cannot legally evaluate is a perceived diminishment of property value. We've had people say, my home is worth $500,000, you can put this farm in, it's only going to be worth $400,000. I won't get into the details of all of that, but again, like aesthetics, under 6072, we cannot evaluate the perceived diminishment of property values, okay? So that's where we sit. The Years in the Water goes out to the Army Corps. The Army Corps meets every 3 weeks for an interagency review, and they bring in EPA, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, NOAA, or National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, EPA, we've had FAA involved recently. It is a joint federal conference on these applications, and they meet every 3 weeks. So, in some of these cases, there might be concerns about endangered or threatened species. Now we're under the Endangered Species Act. NOAA and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service get involved. So it's been reviewed by the state agencies, it's been reviewed by the federal agencies. One thing I should mention with the experimental lease, there's no public hearing associated with this. There may or may not be a public hearing on the experimental lease, the 4-acre, 3 years. If 5 or more people request it, or at our discretion, we can hold a public hearing. If 5 people request it, we will hold a public hearing. For a while it was, well, on a Friday night, if you get together with 4 buddies and a 6-pack of beer, you might be able to get your 5 signatures and we go to public hearing. Standard lease, mandatory public hearing. We have driven to Eastport and had nobody show. And then we drive back home. We've driven to Brooksville and had 300 people show. So you never quite know. This application goes out. One of the things we do is we go out and we will dive the site. We'll take samples if we need to. We'll look for eelgrass. We try to compare the proposed application and how it adheres to those 10 decision criteria, because all 10 have to be met. We then write what's called a site review report, which is not an opinion about the merits of it, it's factual information. We have 2 hearings officers that run these public hearings. If you haven't been to a public hearing, they're very formal, sworn in, testimony, cross-examination of the applicant. A member of DMR will testify, open themselves to questioning by anyone in the room. Members of the public can testify, open themselves to anyone in the room. It's a very formal legal process. The role of the hearings officer in DMR is to distill the factual information down and make a determination as to whether or not it meets those 10 decision criteria and whether it's reasonable or unreasonable. I frequently said, if one guy sets one trap in the area in the first week of June and that's it, displacing them probably is not unreasonable. If you get 50 people show up and they say there's traps all over the place, that's probably going to rise to the level unreasonable. But that's for the hearings officer to distill out the factual information, and it's for the commissioner to ultimately make the decision. The commissioner is the ultimate decision maker. Now, how does the town get involved? Because right now it sounds like state water, state decision, the town's left out in the cold. In all of these, first of all, you can always call or write DMR. If you'd like to talk to somebody tomorrow, you can call. If you'd like to send us a letter about something, we will accept that letter and entertain it. We have a 30-day public comment period before we decide whether or not to go to public hearing. We definitely go to public hearing, we have a 30-day notice, and we have the decision after that. We have the 30-day notice in the public hearing. Where does the town get involved? For each of these processes, there's a public comment period. We will, in the pre-app, in the scoping, we'll send a copy to the town, to the harbor master, and ask for their comments. There is nothing that prevents a town from gathering together like this on a specific application. It's rare for me to stand up and talk to people without an application in play, because typically applications set up where there's going to be a winner and a loser. Here we don't have that tonight, so we can deal a little more freely on things. The town harbor master will get a questionnaire asking about various things like navigation, fishing, anchorages, storm anchorages, moorings, riparian access. That's the first way for the town to weigh in. You can hold a meeting. There's nothing to say the select board couldn't say, we would like to get together and discuss application X as a community. Based on something like that, you can send a letter. You can go to any public hearing. You can provide written comments. You can go to a public hearing, provide written testimony, and that includes the town in an official capacity. It also includes residents of the local area. There's something called intervenor status, which is literally a legal seat at the table, where you are party to all communications between the department and the applicant's party to all of your communications with the department. It gives you a chance to review the draft decision. So, options, how does the town get involved? Harbor master at the pre-app, harbor master or the town select board at the scoping session. Review of our application once it's sent to the town and the other agencies for review. Attendance at the public hearing and testimony, intervenor status. One of the things we will frequently get, and I caution people who call up at their landowners and they say, you know, this is a terrible idea, and this is an exaggeration, but if this goes in, all the seals are going to die in the river. One of the things the department is tasked with doing is determining the reality and the veracity of the testimony and the comments that have been provided. My guidance to people when they're making statements is, you tell us your perceived effects, but we're going to want to know by what mechanism and how. You tell me all the seals are going to float to the surface and die. My next question is going to be how? Under what mechanism? What's going to kill them? And that's the benefit. I've been involved in some public hearings of late where a person gets up and testifies, they say what they want to say, and then they go sit down. There's no questioning, there's no cross-examination, there's no distilling through the facts. One of the things that our hearings officers have gotten quite good at is filtering through the stuff, the chaff, to the meat of the situation. How well does it go to those 10 decision criteria? Hearings officer will write what's called a findings of fact, conclusions of law. It's reviewed internally. It goes to the AG's office for his legal review. The commissioner then reviews it. It goes out to the parties, which is typically the applicant, anyone who's intervened, for a 10-day comment. They can make comments on factual or perceived problems with it. Then a final decision is written. The ultimate challenge, I guess, to a department decision is the Superior Court. And I presume that would be right up the road here. You can file an appeal with the Superior Court as an individual, as a town, to challenge that. And it's happened a few times, and I'm happy to say I don't think we've lost any yet. So that's the basic process of how things work in terms of our 6072, what's been given to us, our Chapter 2, how our process works, or review, how we try to solicit information. That's it in a nutshell. I'm open to discussion and
Talked about how people get notified. Coming up the river the other day, my boat, I'm lost in the river, and I noticed there were a bunch of polyballs in the spot that I frequently lobster in the summer, in the fall, and the spring. And how does the lobsterman really know? Because I'm sure if the guys see where from what I gather, there's going to be a proposed oyster farm there. And
east of the middle ground?
no, this was up near Bragdon Island on the west side, I guess, of Bragdon.
Okay.
And we fish that really heavy in the spring, in some of the summer, but in the fall too.
Yep, couple of options available there. The easy answer is to say, well, check in with your town. I suspect you've got other things to do than check with the town twice a week.
I didn't know.
Right,
If I had
you don't know.
coming up the river and saw it, I wouldn't know.
Yep. One of the things you can do is get on our mailing lists, our general mailing lists. Flora, do you have any suggestions on reaching out to lobstermen?
I mean, it's a little aquaculture, LPAs, there isn't as long of a process and there isn't as much public comment period for LPAs, unlike the larger leases, so it is a little bit tricky, and being in good communication with the town would be.
Because I know in this one spot, I bet you there's 6 or 7 lobstermen that fish in there throughout the course of the year. And, I mean, if you looked at it on the map, you would probably say, I can't believe you guys are fishing there, because low tide, there's about this much water, but it does hold some lobsters in there, and you know, in that river, you're trying to, it's not a lot of spots with this lobsters, so. I guess my big concern, you know, I think it's great that these oyster farms are popping up. I'm a big fan of oysters and love them, and it's great, and I know it's hard work, and I guess I'm just a little bit fearful of all of a sudden this thing catches on, and all our spot, you're gonna show up one day, especially when you don't fish up there all winter, and you come up there in the spring, and all of a sudden there's oyster cages up there that you can't. You know, most of us guys fish strings up there, and, you know, you're kind of at a loss, I guess.
Yeah, that points to a couple of things. I mean, clearly, there's opportunity for us to miss things. That's why we sort of depend on the harbor master's signature on these LPAs. Whether or not the harbor master has that kind of really intimate local knowledge, I don't know. Question that frequently comes up is, where does this end? Is Maine going to turn into a river of oyster bags on both sides with a corridor to get from point A to point B? What's the long-term end point to all of this? And it comes down to the answer that I can provide is this. We have those 10 decision criteria. As long as it can fit those 10 decision criteria, it will be granted. In this case, it sounds like maybe it interfered with existing fishing, and we didn't get that information from you. Again, it's kind of a burden to say check in with the town. As a community, and this discussion is sort of going on up and down the coast. As a community, maybe it's possible when LPAs come in that they're posted. We post them. We post leases on our webpage. But LPAs, which are small scale, the other thing that's really important to recognize: 20-year lease term, 3-year lease term, non-renewable. So we either have to move the local standard. LPA is a 1-year license. So I say you can write to us anytime. The floor's had a number of them that have gone through, and then the letters pour in, and do we renew it, do we not renew it, whatever. So the real honest answer is, if we screwed up, we probably screwed up for a year. Doesn't mean it goes on forever. We just need to hear about it to make that decision just now.
Is there criteria for if somebody's done with it, like after 3 years, that they have to remove it?
Yes, a couple of things. Thank you for
How's
that
that
question.
enforced?
Yeah, a couple of things. I'll start early on. We have an enforcement program where our Bureau of Public Health, Water Quality, the Aquaculture Group, and Marine Patrol inspect all 3 of these licenses and lease sites throughout the state once a year. There's a bonding requirement. If you have any gear in the water, if you just have oysters on the bottom and walk away, probably nobody's going to know. They're free for the taking. It's a wild product at that point. A bond is required, either a bond or an escrow is required based on the amount of gear in the water. And that runs from $5,000 escrow or bond, and you can go to a bonding agency, basically, that will, it's not an insurance policy, but they will cover either 5 or somewhere between 5 and 25 based on how much gear is there. If we need to, we call that bonding company, say we're pulling the bond of Mr. Smith, we will get the site cleaned up, and then the bonding company goes after the leaseholder themselves. They're required to have bonds in place or that escrow, one or the other. We had one instance in Cutler 5 or 6 years ago where a fellow more or less walked away from it. He was still in the town, but there the things just sat and deteriorated. We were going to pull that bond, and ultimately he just did it himself. Other interesting part is about 4 or 5 years ago, again, as part of the legislative process, we received the ability to seize and sell gear that was left behind. I frequently refer to it as a garage sale. Somebody abandons it, abandoned property, the department has the ability to seize it, pull a bond, and sell that gear. So that's the cleanup mechanism.
Couple of things, John. On the LPAs, why can't you notify the towns? I'm sure there's no losses, you can't, I mean, usually too much information is not a bad thing.
What we're doing is notifying through the harbor master.
Why can't you notify the town office? And they can post it on the websites, most towns have it, an email list or whatever.
Something to consider.
And
See
we
a problem?
we do send out information to the town at the time of renewal and have
Well,
that information.
No, I mean when they're being first thought of.
I think it's a great suggestion, I just wanted to add that.
So-
other piece.
Well, the clerk signs off on that LPA as well. Is that,
No. Typically, it's the harbor master. I'm not aware of the town
I
clerk
do.
signing off on
I
it.
sign off.
usually
on it,
they
try
come
to
in and get a
consider it.
signature.
One of the problems that exists in some of the local communities, it'll get sent to the town office. As you know, sometimes communities have part-time harbor masters. Maybe the communication isn't what it should be between the town office
Well, I
and the
just
harbor
think
master. But
a simple thing to solve.
It is.
that. And the other question is, are more leases allowed in the Demascota River?
are more leases allowed? Sure. As long as
There's no limit?
There's no limit, and that's a discussion that's occurred around the state ever since I've been here. People have said, why don't we zone the state?
Well, I'm not talking about that, but in our family's case with a lease, 20 years or whatever, we were told at one point we could have no more than 3 million animals on the lease site because of, at that time, was a food aspect. As cohogs, plants, mussels around, depleting the food source.
Yeah, I'd be real surprised. I'd love to know who told you that one.
Well, I think you would be surprised. But anyhow,
'Cause-
what is the criteria for,
Yep,
I mean,
for food,
does the state have any answer on how many leases they'll allow?
as long as it meets those 10 decision criteria,
So
by
what's
by
the-
6072, by the law, if it meets those 10 decision criteria, we have to grant it. You're asking, can another one fit in? Sure it can.
Well, I'm asking, what's the state's plan?
The state doesn't have a plan, to be honest with you.
That's what I thought.
The
But
state does
anyhow,
not have a plan. The question frequently comes up, and I want to make this real clear. The question frequently comes up, what's the carrying capacity? And I think this was one of the questions we had. We have to make a very clear distinction between biological carrying capacity and social carrying capacity. Because biological carrying capacity is enormous in this state. The amount of algae, a little bit of background, a little bit of biology here. Oysters, we'll go with that. They just filter the water, whatever's in there, good, bad, or indifferent. If it's the right particle size, they're gonna take it, they're gonna test it. They can digest it and use it, they're going to use it. The life cycle or lifespan of phytoplankton generally, you see it out there when it blooms in the spring, is about 2 or 3 days.
Except for red tide.
Yeah. Well, they're constantly replenishing. So you get a replenishment and others fall down. And that's basically what creates the sediments on the bottom, those soft sediment areas. The carrying capacity for shellfish in most estuaries in the state is enormous, to the point where if we started to push that, we wouldn't recognize the state of Maine. So socially what happens is, it interferes, when you ask, can you have something in the Damascata River? You can, as long as you're not interfering with fishing, navigation, the ecology. Your 3 million oyster
Yeah.
deal, that may have been in your application when that came in.
We didn't put it in.
I'm gonna have to go back and look at that, because in 21 years, 20 plus, I do not remember a single case where the department has made the unilateral decision of prescribing how many animals can be on a particular lease site.
But the question is, DMR regulates it, the license, the leases, everything else. So I would think at some point, DMR with local towns should form some kind of plan and say you meet the criteria, you're in. At some point, you're out, the towns are out, the people are out, certain people are gonna be affected in one way or another. So I would think DMR, to get a little bit ahead of the game, would attempt to solve that somehow, because they regulate it.
Yeah, let me go back on the biological carrying capacity and then the town's role in things, okay? Biological carrying capacity is tremendously variable. If you go out and you sample a piece of the New Meadows River right now, and then you go back out a week from now when it's hot and sunny, and then you get a rainfall, and then you get a few days of cloudy weather, or you go out in January, or you go out next year, the levels of algae and phytoplankton bouncing is enormous.
Yep.
And if I go on one side of middle ground or the other side of middle ground, that composition of available food to shellfish is probably going to differ on either side of the middle ground. So for us to take an entire water body and say, here's what can go in there in a biological way, is an enormous task, especially when you look at it statewide, okay? The town, there is no reason, Harpswell did this a number of years ago. They took an intern from Bowdoin, I believe, and he looked at the water bodies and the uses and local knowledge. Have shellfish grown there before? Is there fishing that goes on there? Is there navigation that goes through there? What's the bottom? Is it eelgrass? Is it soft mud? What's the water temperature? All these things, and what might be good for mussels, might not be good for scallops, might not be good for oysters, might not be good for seaweed. So you've got all these variables in play at once. One of the things I think that's available to the town is to have this sort of a discussion on a water body level. Your town waters, you know your town waters, you know the area around you. You can bring that to us. Honestly, I don't see the state investing the amount of money and the people power it would take to come up with a quantitative estimate of what biological carrying capacity is in these water bodies. And I'll tell you this, personally, if somebody tells you they've got that number, I would be skeptical. One of the things, and it's not really comforting, but one of the things that farmers will tell you is, if we start to exceed carrying capacity, and I will argue that we are way below the biological carrying capacity, even in the Damerscott River. But one of the things the farmers say, if that came, who's the first person to lose and notice it? The farmers. Suddenly a 3-year oyster or a 2-year oyster goes to a 4-year oyster or a 5-year oyster. There's sort of, that measurement, I guess, that empirical observational measurement of how things are growing. But it's kind of a cop-out, I guess, but the monumental exercise it would take to describe, you can have 3 million, and you can have 2 million, and you can have 1 million over there, and you can have 4 million, because the limit is X. It's a feel-good exercise as far as I'm concerned. So the town, I think many towns should have a conversation about what's socially acceptable. Because my experience, and I think it's the experience around the nation, the social carrying capacity gets hit long before the biological carrying capacity. The town should be able to look at it and say, we know there's eelgrass here, we know there's lobstering here, we know there's scallop dragging here, we know there's boat racing here, we know there's a mooring field, we know people navigate this way. I have to be honest with you and tell you, I don't think the town is going to get, carte blanche authority and veto authority on what leases are because they're publicly held waters. But that doesn't mean the town shouldn't have a discussion about what they think the town should look like.
So what I hear you saying is that kind of a spatial plan put in by the town with the harbor master, which gives the harbor master some guidance and where things go on. And that's something that the state would respect in terms of the lease application and review process.
I think it's completely fair to say we would respect that. I don't think, to be honest with you, that the state would take it and say, well, if the Bath Select Board says this is a bad idea, but what they're saying really doesn't have much meat on the bone, we might deviate from their recommendation.
Right, but if it was a good,
But if it's a
report,
absolutely.
a marine spatial plan that's put together by a crew of people that do that.
And then you have to ask, okay, here's the marine spatial plan. I'll use this term. What will fit in this area in terms of aquaculture? Is it mussels? That's long line or raft, different gear type. Is it oysters, requiring warmer temperatures than a sea scallop? What's the water depth? There's a lot of variables to play into that. So right now we take them on an ad hoc basis, one at a time, and see if they meet those decision criteria. The town shows up, the town's had a discussion with the applicant, the town's, You mentioned, the marine spatial planning, you talked to the harbor master. I think you also talked to the fishermen.
Right.
You talked to clammers and wormers. You talk to people who navigate in the area. You talk to shorefront property owners. You talk to residents. It's not an easy process.
You can hire somebody to do that.
You could hire somebody to do that,
Is what you do.
But somebody had a hand up here.
Yeah, it's on the LPAs, all these people that got LPAs, I'm harbor master in Pittsburgh. And when they come out, it's only 400 feet or whatever. But every one of these guys are making money, so they're gonna jump into the next category, and then the next category. And just because the harbor master doesn't sign off, even if he did sign off, there's no rule that says, I mean, really, what are we doing? Just saying there's no navigation, but you guys don't have a way you can tell us, yeah, they reached the limit, because there's nothing there to reach the limit.
Each one is taken as a whole, as an individual lease application. And that's the way the process has been built since, early 1980s.
But what I'm saying is, from a law enforcement standpoint, I'm also a shellfish warden in West Bath. What do we have? I know it's 6671 is different than this, but where there's no cap on anything, and it's going to be overcrowded, and I can see conflict between lobster fishermen and farmers, and then it's fighting, and there's no rules saying, okay, this is where we're going to go, this is where we're going to do this.
I do not disagree with you.
There are density requirements, though, right?
There are density limits on LPAs. You can't have essentially 4 within 1,000 feet. You can't have 3 within 1,000 feet of any other one. And when the program was set up, it was so we didn't have one just chock-a-block full of LPAs. You're allowed 4, but you can have 3 helpers on an LPA. One of the things we've run into is somebody got 4, and then their wife got 4, and their kid got 4, and their toddler got 4. We have an LPA down east with a kid in diapers. Well, this kid is not turning oyster gear. Dad's doing all the work. So just this year, we went to rulemaking under Chapter 2 and said you can have 4 LPAs, you can be a helper on 8 more. Because one of the things we heard, and we have 2 public hearings, is some people are using these LPAs as a business model. And they're looking to have enough that they can hire somebody. We've had instances where kids have had LPAs, they go back to college in the fall, Dad would like to continue to work that farm. So we tried to narrow down how many. What did we have? One person with 28 basically they were working on? Something like that. So we've tried to cut that down a little bit. The discussion needs to happen, I think, in terms of what do we look like. There have been more master plans, strategic plans, task forces to describe, and if you go to the executive summary on almost all of these, in 10 years, we're all going to be rich, we're all going to be happy, there's going to be no social conflict, and the ecology is going to be great. And that's the end of the report. In 2003, the governor had a task force put together, a variety of people, I don't know how many times it met. They made some changes like the pre-application and the scoping, some tweaks to it, but fundamentally, there were not a lot of great changes. Locally, I would encourage the town to have a conversation with their harbor masters, with the waterfront users, all types, and come up with something. Because one of the things that we get into is we get really good applicants, experienced applicants, we get really naive applicants. I want 200 acres, and everybody's happy with it. And then you go to the scoping session, and lo and behold, not everybody's happy with it. In fact, nobody's happy with it. So the concept of having a discussion, we have applicants, it would be a great benefit to aquaculturists to come in and go, all right, the town of West Bath has gone through this process. And I know this is a terrible spot because people water ski there or whatever. And I know there's eelgrass here and there's lobster in here. Maybe I should apply there because that seems to be a happy place. And one of our greatest thrills is to get an applicant who has done all their homework with the town, all their homework with the fishermen, and they bring us paperwork and we become consummate bureaucrats, hold our public hearing, and sweep up the dust and not have to deal with conflict. So the point about notifying towns with the LPAs, Flora and I will talk about that tomorrow, it's probably a good idea. Leases, You get a lease application, harbor master gets a notification in, an experimental lease or a standard lease, go to public hearing. There's nothing to say that there cannot be communication with the applicant in the town. That's what the scoping session is supposed to do. They don't always work out.
Well, at the same time, can't you advise the town office when there's a lease, experimental?
We always do.
You do?
We do on leases.
Okay.
Yes. Yep, we do on leases. Short-term property owners within 1,000 feet, lobster zone
Right.
councils, the town. We publish things in the local newspaper, we're required. We operate under something called the Administrative Procedures Act. That's where our public hearings are run, our public notice is done. We are required by law to give 30-day public notice in a local newspaper, and typically Commercial Fisheries News, a trade journal is what it's been referred to. So that 30-day notice is out there, but you know in the scoping session, you know, we work through the town. If we were holding a scoping session here tonight for John Smith, we would have worked through the town to borrow this room. If we were going to go to a public hearing, people would have been notified, it would have been advertised, the town, the harbor master, the local communities, the lobster zone councils. And we would work with the town to go, we're going to hold a hearing in, 45 days, does this work for you? So it's out there, but I'm getting the sense maybe there's just a little bit of, not huge communication gaps, but it's those minor ones that,
I think it's not as tight as it ought to be,
the communication.
the lines of communication and all of that.
So-
Seems like that could be improved.
So I'll play cop out here. What more can we do? Pre-app, scoping, notify the town, notify the landowners, notify the zone councils, notify all the state and federal agencies, put it up on our webpage. What more can we do?
Have you ever declined somebody?
Oh, yeah.
Because the town, you have, okay.
And the town raised a concern, and we had similar concerns. To be fair, there have been those where the town has had objections, and the most noticeable one was the town had objections in Bar Harbor, because a fellow wanted to put an oyster farm in, I think it was about 5,000 feet from the end of the runway. And the town said, this is going to be bad for the airport. We don't do FAA, we don't do aviation, any more than we do commercial trucking. So we said it goes through the federal process, the FAA is going to be involved, the Army Corps, please work with them. That one was granted, the Army Corps granted it as well. But yeah, we have turned some way.
Do you notify the Lobster Association in certain zones? The
Lobster Zone Councils, yes.
You do notify them so these guys can find out when a lease is going in LPA still?
And LPAs, I don't think so, no.
So then the question, you might notify them so these guys would know beforehand?
I'm on the advisory panel for Zone F, but we never talk about LPAs or leases or anything.
LPAs are a little odd in that they have, because they're licensed, 400 square feet, not necessarily renewable. They are probably the most contentious piece in a lot of ways because there's not a lot of public process around that. Again, anybody here from the legislature? 6072, we're following their laws. We can create notification laws. There's nothing to say we can't notify people.
Not to me, another question of just communicating with another group of people.
But
Let them know.
what we've seen frequently is like we'll send it to the chair of the Lobster Zone Council, and there it sits.
Well, you've done your job.
We send it to town clerks, and there it sits. The harbor master never gets it. We send it to the harbor master, never let the bigger town know about it.
Yeah.
So granted, there are some things that we can do better, and I'm totally open to that. There is a responsibility, I think, on the town level to bridge those gaps, and the zone councils, and the harbor masters, and all of those things.
Hopefully working together.
It's all working together, yep. And to be real honest with you, it's not our job to make sure the town works together.
No, but it's your job to work with the town.
John,
Absolutely,
if the harbor-
and that's what I'm saying, what more can we do, short of hand delivering? We email, we mail, we notify the residents, we put it in the newspaper, we work with the town, yeah.
Possibly a double notification, that in addition to the harbor master, it goes to the town clerk and the chair of the Board of Selectmen.
Well, I
So
think
that
the-
you have another, it would, it doesn't happen in this town that the town clerk drops anything,
Yeah, that's right.
because she's good.
Well, it sounds
But
like
it
the
does
whole
in
is
some places, I'm
LPAs.
sure.
It sounds like the whole is more of the LPAs, because the DMR sends out email notifications for everything, scallops, lobsters, and there is one for oyster aquaculture,
They're all like,
but it's not LPA specific.
When
Those
the
are-
LPA is issued, we do send a notice to the harbor master. So maybe the problem is that we're communicating only with the harbor master and there needs to just.
But you've already issued it at that point.
That's true. The harbor master's already signed it at that point indicating that there
So the problem with the meadows, you know, the meadows falls in West Bath, it falls in
Right.
Harpswell, and it
Right.
falls in Pittsburgh. So unless everybody's talking, you know, and I'll just say this, you know, I think Joe's done a nice job, you know, placing some of these where they are. It hasn't been evasive at all at this point, you know, and there's a few places, but to your point about reasonable and unreasonable, we can work around that. I'm just concerned that, you know, even if we mess up for a year, that's a year I can't, you know, catch lobsters where I've caught lobsters before. Or, to Doug's point, it gets contentious, and we're gonna set gear, you know, regardless, and it's gonna be a big fight, and I don't want that. I don't think anybody wants that. I think there's, you know, I think you talk about put, you know, a map, a plan, and, I mean, might be beneficial to take a look at that, you know, get a few folks together, take a look at this, because I think the river can support more in certain areas. It's just, all of a sudden, you know, you show up and all of a sudden they're there. And it's the LDAs that I think are the big issue.
Is there for each category, is each application looked at in isolation by itself, or is there a cumulative impact standard where you look at that application as it gets more and more crowded?
one of the decision criteria is other aquaculture uses of the area. And that's not so much the big ecological picture. That's, if you want to put in a farm, is it going to hurt my farm somehow? That's more of that standard. In terms of the big cumulative impact, it's sort of, here's one application, here's another one, it meets the criteria, table's getting a little heavy, oops, you just put the extra one on there, it fails to meet one of those criteria. That's the way the process is run.
First come, first serve is what you're saying?
First come, first serve, and we got a lot of people coming right now. So it's, but the answer to your question is no, we don't have a this is the end build out. There's nothing to say the town can't have that discussion, number one. Flora, actually, the LPA, when somebody goes with an LPA and they come into the harbor master's office, they have to sign off on that. I'm guessing most times they're in a hurry, would like that signature that afternoon. Is that fair to say? Yeah. You know, what I'm wondering is we've got a 14-day public comment period on LPAs. Is it reasonable to think that the harbor master from the local area, when an applicant comes in, could say we want X amount of time before I'm willing to sign off on this? I'd like to clear this through some of the local people, through the town. That's not our process. And I probably suffer from advocating any kind of a delay in people getting a signature, but to ensure that that kind of communication occurs, I don't know.
What if the harbor master
That could be
refuses to
helpful.
sign off?
Can we, as the board or as the town meeting, say that we require or et cetera, before the harbor master can sign off, we require a 30-day notice, or can we do that?
I'm a lawyer, I'm a biologist.
Could it happen? Could we try it without getting into too much legal trouble?
I'm getting a sense that
I
we
think
can't.
you can. I think you can set any policy you want on harbor master.
One of the things that happens with the harbor master, Dan just asked the
Yeah.
question, and the harbor master refused to sign. What happens? Harbor master can refuse to sign if there's a reason not to sign.
Yeah,
If the harbor master dated the applicant's sister in high school and had a bad breakup, so he refuses to sign,
that's not a good reason.
that's not a good reason. We do have a section in, I think it's one of those, that says if the harbor master refuses to sign without cause, they can go to Marine Patrol officer and have them do it. If the Marine Patrol officer is not familiar with the area, we can make our own determination as to whether or not the harbor master had a reason not to sign, or if it was just some sort of personal vendetta.
But to have a spatial plan that backed up the harbor master's decision would be ultimately the right way to go, I would think, for a municipality. It would give them a little bit more, you know, kind of lead in the process.
Chris, do you see any money around? This is Chris Von White from Gulf Maine Research Institute. Do you see any money around through like CNA or Dana to do local spatial planning?
Wouldn't you base it on the criteria though?
Grants.
Yes.
I mean, as far as like funding, we don't, you know, we're not in the business of administering grants, but I mean, I think it's just really hard to do an objective spatial planning that considers everybody's activities. Because if I'm, you know, let's say I'm a sailor and I don't want aquaculture going in the river, and I know that there's going to be, you know, a group that's going to be doing an assessment over the next 2 years of existing uses, I'm going to put my sailboat in a lot of places, and I'm going to ask my buddies to put their sailboats in a lot of places, so those are cataloged, you know, as existing sailing areas. And just how do you get that? I mean, I think it's a good idea if the town can come together and everybody can agree. Like they did it in New Jersey, and I'm friends with the person who did it. It took them 10 years.
And that's someone offshore, off state-owned property?
Well, they ended up with one area that was conserved land that nobody saw, and then one area that was offshore as well, that nobody saw. So anyway, it's just, I mean, there could be money for that.
I think there's the question about, like, you know, wouldn't you be looking at the decision criteria? And that's one of the problems, because people have said, why doesn't the state do this on a statewide basis? Right now, we look at it and say, somebody wants to put in a 2-acre farm right here in this area. And we go out and we dive the site, we map the site, we look at the bottom. Is there eelgrass? Is there lobstering? Is there scallops? We consult with people. But now you move 300 yards down the bay. Is there eelgrass there? Is there lobstering there? Do people navigate? Are there mooring fields there? Now let's go another 300 yards down the bay. Let's go around the corner to the other side of middle ground. What's it look like there? What's it look like at the mouth of the river? To determine how well each area of the coast fits those 10 decision criteria is a monumental exercise. So right now, we are stuck with taking them on an ad hoc basis as they come, does it fit? Trying to predetermine what fits and will not fit is a tough one. The local people, I think, have got the best opportunity to at least have that discussion. Yes, sir.
Well, I was yawning, but I did have another question. What about uses sort of above the water, like a storehouse or machinery or any activity that is related to the aquaculture that is more in the nature of a structure, lights, noise, generators?
Yep. A couple of things. When a person comes into lease, let's just say they're leasing this area of this room. And if they want to put a floating structure on with a house and a washer and a generator and all of that, we look at, is it an unreasonable noise, light, or visual impact? Colors, that sort of thing, they have height restrictions. But noise is a big issue. We had a fella down east who said he wanted to power wash 8 hours a day, 6 days a week, whenever there wasn't snow on the ground. And he said, it's not that bad. It's probably no louder than a lawnmower or leaf blower. And I said, if my neighbor starts leaf blowing 40 hours a week, I'm going to jail. Because, so those kind of things. So if it's on the lease site, okay, that becomes part of our decision criteria. Does it fit? Is it too noisy? Is it too bright? Is it too big? If it's off the lease site, maybe it's a mile away, maybe it's 100 yards away, but it's no longer contained within that area we are leasing, they either get a Corps permit or a harbor master permit to put that in there. At that point, it's no different than then hanging an ugly boat on a mooring. That's not our jurisdiction. Our aquaculture leasing is in the area being applied for. If it's 4 acres, what happens a mile downriver to support that operation falls to local ordinances. If it's on a mooring, it's Harbor Master or Army Corps of Engineers.
And so, if part of the process is to clarify for the long-term leases, those pieces have to be applied for as well. They're in that application, so people know that they're going to be or not be there.
If they are within the confines of those lease boundaries. We have had on occasion, I've learned to ask, somebody comes in, here's a 4-acre lease site, are you gonna, nope, there's no raft in the application, there's no power washing, there's no noise, there's no nothing. And a year later, you look out and there's a 25-foot barge with a house on it and all the equipment running. And people said, I thought you didn't have it. Well, it wasn't in the lease because it's not physically within the lease, it's a separate thing. We've had people move into neighborhoods, Seems to be a good little oyster farm in the business, and he's working in his garage running his power washer at 11 o'clock at night in the neighborhood. That's not our jurisdiction,
Related kind of, I guess, is the new aquaculture license.
Yes.
How much money do you propose that might generate this year? Half is supposed to be for research, right?
Yeah, gonna have
In
to.
theory.
What is it, $130?
133, I believe it is.
And we have 125 leases. So do the math on that one.
I'm just wondering if DMR has thought what kind of research they hope to gain from this fund. What are they going to research, do you know?
At that point, the money's not there. We do not have a plan for what kind of research. We talk about it all the time. We're all trained as scientists. Our job title is.
So what would you research if you had funds available in this,
Hypothetically.
to coach him on it? No, I'm going to coach him on it.
Turn
When
off
I research, world peace comes to mind. One of the things we've looked at, a long time. We've got some shellfish declines, we've got clam declines, we've got mussel declines around the state. We had a plan 6-7 years ago to look at eelgrass. Because one of the things, eelgrass is great nursery habitat for a number of shellfish, number of finfish species, and we were going to get it into McCoy Bay, because a little bit of a sidebar, we've got eelgrass, we know it's very important habitat. When you put oyster bags at the surface, you are shading those plants, okay? That's a negative. Oysters, like every other organism, has waste material, and yep, they poop, and you're fertilizing at the same time. So we had a whole program built up where we were going to have empty bags just shading, we were going to have oysters in those bags shading and fertilizing, and we were going to have a control. We were ready to go. We talked about it for a couple of years. I think Dan was one of the first ones, woke up in 2012 and all the eelgrass was gone in McCoy Bay. Now what? One of the constraints has been, down in McCoy Bay we've had the horns working for years. There's been eelgrass there for years while they were operating, and suddenly it disappeared. Eelgrass is always a big one, habitat end of things. Frankly, I think scientifically, with the staff we have, looking at things like carrying capacity is probably well beyond our capability. We have talked about doing research for years. The problem we run into is when Flora's been here going on 2 years and has issued 300 LPAs, and we've got 40 lease applications in the work. It's really hard to tell somebody who's got a year or two invested in a business plan, a lease application, and everything else, that we're going to go sit in warm salt water and count eelgrass blades. It doesn't fly real well. So in terms of any dedicated, one of the things that I would advocate for, and I can say this one, there are diseases, particularly down south. We've had MSX in the Damascata and parts of the Sheepscot. We are very much afraid of dermo coming up from southern parts of the states. We don't really have any idea what kind of pathogens or disease agents exist in our shellfish stocks around the coast. We have put in money for years through various funding agencies and collaborated with others to try to get sort of a survey done. What goes on in Mill Cove? What goes on, in the Casco Bay? What goes on in the Damascata? Should we be moving oysters from X to Y around the state? Are we transferring disease with that? Parasites. So that screening of where are we now is something I would advocate for.
Well, let's trust some of this fund is used in that manner and not wasted.
That's the intent.
Yeah, I know.
Again, I tell each and every one of you, you know, we're working coast-wide. Seriously, if you have got concerns, opinions, criticisms about the department, from my end, specifically about aquaculture, I got business cards, my phone number is 633-9594, I'm on the webpage. Give me a call.
No, that's what's here for tonight. That's what's
Yeah.
for tonight.
But when you find out a year from now that we're gonna go study eelgrass or something and you disagree, pick up the phone. And
If I
the
find
only
out.
way we can operate, and I'll use this expression, is serve the public, is if we know what the public needs.
Well, maybe the DMR can tell the public in their newsletter or their email list, this is what this money's gonna be used for. Right now, they say they're gonna take half of it for research. I wanna know when they decide what they're gonna research.
Yeah, to be honest with you,
So do you.
I wasn't even aware we were getting half of it for research. So that'll be something on my
That's
board for
what,
tomorrow.
that's what the report said. But it'd be nice if DMR said, this money's gonna be earmarked and used for this purpose.
I'll have to
Instead
go
of
back
just saying,
and look at the
research.
legislation, look at our rules, because that's news to me, that any of this is gonna be used for
Yeah.
research. Anybody here more familiar with the whole thing? I'll check.
Please do.
For areas like the New Meadows
Yep.
that is experiencing growth in leasing, would it be possible to either annually or every 2 years have essentially a unified public hearing where you're treating all the applications essentially at the same time, and you're able to look at the big picture as well as the small picture and do it in a setting where you can have up on the wall, you know, here's everything that's permitted, here are the new applications, and you can get input from a broader sense of the community? You have a limited amount of time.
Formally, yeah, we have to, I think we have to have an application reviewed within 30 days by rule. Once a hearing is made, we have to have a decision issued. The problem with that is, let's say everybody here's got an application, and we come to a public hearing, and now we're looking at the big picture, and we go, yeah, this section of the room, you're pretty good. How do we make that determination without going out and seeking public comment, visiting the site, characterizing the bottom? I am totally in favor of that kind of thing happening every year or two with local communities to get some feedback. What?
And there also is that opportunity with the LPAs, because every year they are reviewed. So if there are issues with LPAs, every year we notify the town there's a 2-week public comment period. So that would be an opportunity, or that would be an avenue for this sort of review for the smaller things.
It'd be a way to organize the different uses, everybody sort of looking at the whole estuary at the same time.
Yeah, I think the problem I see with the river, I don't know if you've ever taken a boat up the river in the summer.
Oh, yeah.
You can probably walk from buoy to buoy. And so the current leases and LDAs now are more up at the beginning of the river where it doesn't get as much pressure. But now as it starts working down the river, I don't know how it's gonna fit some of the criteria, and then it's who takes priority. You know, the fishermen or the lobstermen or.
Right now, the criteria is, shall not unreasonably interfere with existing fishing. So existing fishing gets the priority. And again, it's a judgment call from the commissioner.
And so the LDA falls on the desk of the harbor master.
In our case, I think it's fair to say that Joe knows what's going on the river. In terms of who's fishing where and all that kind of stuff, because he's been on the river
Longer than me.
for a long time. And the experience is extraordinarily valuable.
He's the godfather.
But, I sit on my little corner of the cove, and I see what uses are, that people make of the water in my little corner of the cove, but I'm not necessarily sure who's going water skiing down at Brigham's Cove. And it does seem as though finding some way of taking inventory of what people are actually doing when they're not fishing, or what's happening on the bottom, would be a very interesting and possibly expensive sort of thing. Can we get an intern? Somebody who will pay us to go to school to do that kind of research. Is that something that interns do these days?
Some do. Harpswell, I know, they grab somebody out of Bowden to do that. I don't know how long it took. I've essentially said for years, there's a lot of prisoners sitting around with nothing to do during the day. Maybe they could compile some survey information.
Just do some collating.
But, yeah, I think that local part, I come back to having that discussion every year or two. Departments rolling might be there, just listen and learn. I think it's sort of a local phenomenon. The state, I can tell you, is going to be very reluctant to give up the authority of publicly held waters for all people and delegate it to town by town by town.
Right.
One thing I didn't mention, when an application comes in, we're required to hold that public meeting in the town in which the lease is going to be located, or would be located. So if it's in the Bath side, we hold it in Bath. If it's in Brunswick, we hold it in Brunswick. Yes, sir.
Before we get too far away, she said that you check those LPAs every year. So if we don't hear from you, which I've never heard from anybody, it means it's okay and nothing's wrong?
Well, there's a renewal period every year, and so we open it up. I send out a letter to all the towns. If people aren't getting those letters, then let me know. But
You send it out before you come down or after you've done the inspection to say it's...
we inspect them in the summer, and the renewal period is over the turn of the year, so it would be totally at different times. But we send out the letter, and we just hope that it's posted in the town, so if people do have issues, or if harbor masters realize, wait, no, this wasn't a good spot for this activity, there's a dedicated time for those comment letters to come in. And to be honest with you, the 400 and probably 15 LPAs that were up for renewal over this past year, I received 2 comment letters. So there is an opportunity, and people aren't jumping on that opportunity, and obviously we're at fault there if people aren't being given or don't know that they have that opportunity. But it is there, it is in regulation, and we can work and try to make it more clear if helpful.
Well, I guess,
Might be the next 400 LPA, so when you're at 800, then you start seeing issues.
Well, it's funny you say that, because I've lobstered in that river all my life, and I remember the first farm was over on the Harpswell side. Bobby Hersey had one over there, and then I started seeing popping up around the middle ground, and and again, it didn't affect me all that much. It was one of those reasonable, can I get around that? Sure. But now I'm starting to see things a little, it's becoming more popular, and so I think we've got to get involved and make this work. If you don't, it's gonna, you're gonna come up there and you're gonna see more.
Yeah.
Can I ask at the zone council, you said you're zone F?
Yeah.
Does this come up very much at all, never?
No, and it could be, Zone F is a pretty big zone. So, I'm a representative of this area. I could bring that up at the next meeting to see if anybody is having any issues, in Portland, Yarmouth, Freeport, or whatever area. But generally, we talk more about the viability of lobsters and, things like that. And maybe it just hasn't been an issue. And I would even say right now, it's not a particular issue. But it could be. I can see it becoming one. And I think if we're not smart, to Doug's point, it's gonna get unclear.
One of the things for years we have told applicants is do your homework. Go talk to fishermen, go talk to Marine Patrol, go talk to harbor masters, go talk to landowners, because you can deal with them before you invest your time and money. You can deal with them if you get your LPA, or you can deal with them at the public hearing, or you can deal with them after you get the lease, if you get the lease, and you really don't want to be working in a neighborhood where everybody hates you. So we have encouraged people for years to reach out to the town and the local community and other users, to figure out what kind of hornet's nests they're whacking, because there have been some. I agree with you right now. You know, if this trend were to continue for another 5 years, we're gonna be back here with a lot bigger audience and a lot more anger, I'm afraid.
The follow-up that I wanted to make is that there's a number of people around the state, including right in this room, if the zone council or the LAC wanted to know sort of what's going on, how do I learn more about this, how do I stay in touch? There's a bunch of people that would be more than happy to come to the zone.
I'll bring it up on the next meeting and I'll let them know that, and, I mean, I think that's good. I don't know how much of an issue it is in other areas, you know, I mean, the Meadows River is a pretty small river for the amount of fishermen that fish there, and, you know, my guess is they haven't had to think about this, because it's all been further up in the river. I think if we start seeing them pop up as they make their way out the river, I think it's gonna be in a lot of people's minds.
Part of the reason it's way up the river, it's primarily oysters.
Yeah.
And oysters thrive in warm water. You get into scallops or seaweed or mussels, they could, you know, move a little further south.
So, on the lobster patch, we had one down on Wood Island, it was a kelp. And I had objections because they wanted to put it in close, in during the lobster season, it's filled with traps there. And so, I don't know how we got worked out, but they take the kelp out of there from May until, I think, September or something like that. So, I mean, they're willing to work with everybody.
What I'm hearing tonight is there's breaks in communication, particularly around the LPAs. Is that?
Well, there is, but if I may, I mean, from what I'm gathering is that the towns have, you know, they have an opportunity to comment. I mean, you've made that very, very clear. And so does the public have an opportunity as individuals to comment. But if the public or the town can articulate what the problem is, DMR, quite frankly, doesn't care, to put it, you know, it's not that you don't care, it's just that if it doesn't fall into the parameters of each category, then say la vie. So with that,
What aesthetics and tax base,
yep.
these criteria have been in existence since the first aquaculture lease law. I gotta stop you on we don't care, because we're constrained, just like the cop pulling you over on 95, if he doesn't like the color of your car, he can't do that. You've got to violate some law.
Right, but you have to follow the rules that are in place.
We have to follow those rules, so it's not that we don't care. We're bound. We dance to the tune that's played for us by the legislature.
But at the same time, if the harbor master, for instance, he doesn't want to sign off because of either he dated that girl in high school or he has a legitimate concern, but he doesn't want to sign off. It goes, then if DMR doesn't agree with his decision not to sign off, DMR has the ability to review it and then rule against the harbor master's decision. So
we have that ability. It's a signature withheld without cause. If the harbor master expresses concern, I'm not saying that's going to carry the day, because we have had harbor masters that factual information just seems a little weak. But if the harbor master presents local knowledge in a case, we are going to sit up and take real strong notice of that. It's not that we're just going to dismiss it because we want to see aquaculture developed. But again, I go back to, if you say it's going to interfere with navigation, can you tell us what kind of boats use it? Is it 2 kayaks, 4th of July weekend? Is it lobster boats every day? Or we need to get down to those brass tacks and the factual basis of things. So it's not like we're going to ignore them. We're going to accept that harbor master local knowledge big time.
okay.
He's got sign off on the LPAs. We don't have a lot where the harbor master has refused to sign, have we?
I've never received one, but I mean, I'm sure there have been some that just.
That's right, we wouldn't see them.
Well, I think for the
Probably
town,
out there.
I think for the town, it's, if it doesn't fall within, to your point earlier, it's, there's no rule on aesthetics. So if somebody has a house on the water and somebody has a piece of water out there that doesn't get used, and somebody wants to put a lease there, you're gonna probably hear from that person, and that's gonna become more problematic for you in terms of not being able to do much about it. Versus, my issue is more, can we work together? Can we reasonably work something out? Or is it just, no, you're not putting it in front of Foster's Point because there's just too much gear there and too much activity over the years. So I think that could be a potential problem for the town, I would guess, if this stuff continues to multiply and multiply. Right now, like I said, it's not invasive. I mean, to the point where it's kind of out of sight a little bit, out of the way. It's not interfering with navigation, but I guess it definitely has a possibility to do that.
That's one of the reasons why we wanted to have this discussion tonight, because with aquaculture growing, the potential for conflict between residents grows, and sitting on the board, I can tell you that the last thing I want to do is to say to one resident, well, I like you, but the other one, I don't. So we need to have what the facts are, and I think we may be missing some facts, even in terms of what we know about ourselves locally, what's happening in the water. I only know a very small portion of the bottom on Mill Cove that I can see when the tide's out. I don't necessarily want to know what's living under that mud. They say there's some really nasty kinds of worms down there. So there's some information that's just not available to everybody. We all have a little tiny piece of it. So figuring out a way that the town can afford to get all this information together so that Joe has information, we have information, we have if there's a need for the town to be an intervener, we have some facts to say, have you thought about this to DMR, and did you know about this rare and wonderful bird that lands here on the 4th of July every 3 years? Those kinds of things that are important, but not everybody knows about because we have our own little corners of the cove that we work or swim on.
So to expand on the sharing of information and so forth, I understand that the town has a right to speak, individuals have a right to speak. Does it, or give input, is one given more weight than the other? Or if a group of private citizens wanted to get together, who care about the New Meadows, and they wanted to form their own private, non-town committee to approach the DMR with their concerns and thoughts, would that be given equal weight as well? Do you understand what I'm...
On an individual lease application?
Yeah.
Yeah, certainly. It would be given, I mean, quite frankly, we do depend on harbor masters.
Mm-hmm.
Theoretically, each testimony is taken at face value without regard to who presents it. But one of the processes of distilling down through the facts is credibility. Harbor masters, being an employee of the town, at least in principle without any vested interest one way or another, probably are given a little bit more weight. There have been groups like you have talked about formed around the coast. And some of them have been quite helpful, and some of them have been quite emotional. And again, it's DMR's job to filter out the emotion and get down to the facts. One of the things that came up, Madeline, as you were talking, we've had applicants come in and they say, you know, one guy, I want to do a mussel farm on the bottom and I want to drag harvest. We roll off the boat and it's covered in eelgrass. What were you thinking? Oyster farmer. We want to put oysters on the bottom, we want to drag harvest. Go down on the bottom, and the bottom is covered with trash can to Volkswagen size rocks. You can't drag harvest in that. Another guy wanted to do scallops and said it's a firm gravel bottom. You know, scallops are going to stick here, and there's a little constrainment there, they're going to stick right in this hard gravel bottom pool. Roll off the boat, it's powdery soft mud that you can stick your arm to in here. So I bring these up because when we, as you talk about, you know what you can see through the water in Mill Cove. If somebody comes 100 yards off, how do you know what's in that? I don't know if the local knowledge is really there to classify with much accuracy as to what the bottom is like in various places. And sometimes the bottom doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Sometimes, you know, if you're growing oysters at the surface, if you're in 10 feet of water or 30 feet of water and the bottom's gravel or the bottom's mud, really doesn't make that big a difference in terms of ecological impact or the other decision criteria.
Right, but all totaled, for the future of aquaculture, which as you say, is probably only gonna get bigger, it'd probably be a good idea if we knew what was down there and figured out long-term how it might be used.
Yeah, and this is probably a horrible way to say it. You know, the towns can certainly create a plan of their own and guide aquaculture and, you know, potential applicants in where's a good fit socially and biologically for what they propose. That can all be done. I cannot up here and honestly promise you and say, the state's going to defer to that town plan. You know?
No, absolutely not. It would just be another, to me, it would be another point of information that would be actually informative rather than, I hate polyballs.
And the converse of that, it doesn't mean, you know, I say we're not going to necessarily accept it. We're certainly not going to just throw it away either.
I mean, would it be, I mean, could DMR, from a public, you know, relations or public information side of things, could DMR facilitate forming, say, using the New Meadows? You've got West Bath and you've got Brunswick who have equal interest, if you will. DMR facilitate a committee that is with representatives from both communities to start that sharing of information? Is that?
Theoretically, yeah. I can tell you right now, our commissioner and deputy commissioner is going, not more committees, not more facilitation, not more people, not more work, not more, less budget. So I have to caution on all of that. Could they conceivably? Yeah, I don't see there's any legal reason not to.
Yeah.
On the local level, we feel the same way though. No, you know, not another comprehensive plan for something.
Yeah.
How fast is this growing? How much time before we have to make zero-sum game choices?
I guess it depends upon where you are.
New Meadows we're talking
The New
about.
Meadows itself. Yes, you see, I've got a different perspective than just the New Meadows. I can't give you a figure on that. Dana, you work in the New Meadows. How long till? In theory, we never get to that zero-sum game because we don't lose. We don't lose existing fisheries. We don't lose navigation. We don't lose access. We don't lose the ecology. In theory, those 10 decision criteria that have stood up for 30 years, before we get to that zero-sum game, a lease gets pulled.
Well, then somebody has lost the applicant, so.
Oh, absolutely.
I'd say anecdotally, it's not, I don't think it's an issue right now.
Right.
I mean, I'm on the river every single day, and it's, you know, they're tucked here and they're tucked there, you know, you get some up in that cove and some up in the middle ground, and it's not a bad thing right now. I think could it be? Sure, if we're not careful. That's why I think we meet the aquas.
Part of that is the regulations. Stuff has to be certain distance from another stuff. So that there's, I don't anticipate that we would have wall-to-wall oyster cages, for instance.
LPAs have to be separated.
Yeah,
Leases do not.
well, the chance of a lease being absolutely chock-a-block full of cages is probably pretty small, because you would kill yourself.
Oh, the whole river? Yeah, we could have multiple leases.
Yeah, but there's a limit to how much you can work.
No, I'm thinking
some
different
of-
companies.
Right.
You know, you've got your lease, you know,
Right.
his lease, I got my lease, and we're,
I think what I took from what you were saying is, it's kind of like you stack them up on the desk, and it's really first come, first served, and at some point, it's gonna run into this criteria that's not gonna allow it. And I think that's the guidelines in which it goes on. I guess the piece for me is not knowing with the LDA and then showing up and having something there. I think
Right.
that's the
Right.
critical piece.
Right.
But again, I think what we're talking, the one I saw, I think must be Harpswell water, isn't that? On the backside of Bragton? Yeah, Harpswell, is that, what's that? 3 miles, yeah.
That's Harpswell.
Yeah, I think it's Harpswell. So again, you know, I mean,
Right.
from West Bath standpoint, I think we've done a really good job at managing this so far, and I'm sure when Joe took the job as harbor master, he didn't probably anticipate this particular topic, but,
There's also gonna be some of those people that take out those leases realize it's a lot of work, and, some of them are going out, because they don't wanna spend that much time managing a business.
John, I can't remember what the regulations say, but do the notices for entities like the zone council, do those have to be in writing, or can they be in email as well?
They can be in email.
Okay, so all the zone council membership is updated, and so you get all the area representatives as well as the chairperson in there. It would be a pretty easy thing to notify a zone by email, and that way you get every little kind of nook and cranny representative.
Typically, what we do is we notify the chair. Are you advocating we notify everybody in that zone?
It'd be easy to do, it's just email.
Those on the list.
It's updates to that email, which you have to check every year once the zones hold elections, but that's relatively tractable.
Flora, is this
I
seen?
think the more notification, the better.
Oh, I do too.
I had a question about the social carrying capacity, which is what we're gonna end up really running into. If you say that most of the time there's enough organisms for the little creatures to be very, very happy, then the real problem is gonna be with the social,
Yeah, and social includes fishing,
yeah.
navigation, landowner access, mooring fields. You know, it's not strictly biological, so.
Right.
Yep. There's some work, University of Maine got a whole bunch of money, National Science Foundation, and 20 million over 5 years. And they are targeting some places looking at biological carrying capacity. There's another group looking at social conflict, if you will.
Yeah.
But again, if it's in front of your window, it really doesn't matter what Penobscot looks like. You know, we had one in, out of Bar Harbor a little while ago, looked at the application and went, this doesn't look too bad. We were in the boat, came around the corner, we're going up one side where the proposed lease was gonna be, and we went, oh, right in front of the picture window. It's those kind of things. I mean, Dana's running some courses. I was up in Machias, we had a group down in, where was it? Well, it was the Darling Center, aquaculture and shared waters, trying to educate new aquaculturists. And one of the take-home messages, and please expand on it, is communication, consideration. Think about what you're doing. We have said, you know, you're representing yourself, you're representing your company, you're representing the industry as a whole. And if an aquaculturist comes in and is just rude in the way they come into this place, it affects everybody. Not only, you know, the local community, but aquaculturists around the state as well. You can't always get that message across.
Well, personally, I don't think there's anything more beautiful than an oyster cage in a bay.
Thank you.
yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm gonna check on research money.
There was an email probably 3 or 4 weeks ago, it was one of DMR's emails.
Yeah, it probably came from me.
No. It was the daily email, probably 3 or 4 weeks ago.
I gotta check it. I have not had any,
No, they said, clearly stated half that was gonna be research.
makes you worry, doesn't it? I hear you. So again, you know, if you've got concerns at the local level, as you talk to your counterparts in other towns, the best thing we can do is communicate. And what I'm getting tonight is LPAs are an issue, and to try to tie that up a little bit.
Just for anybody who cares to reach out, do you mind sharing your phone number and email address maybe one more time?
I don't at all. It's, you write it down, you can put it on your webpage if you like.
All right.
1-800-HELP.
I did this one time and immediately gave my home phone number. So
Don't do that.
desk phone is 633-9594. And the email is Jon, Jon, .Lewis, Lewis, @maine.gov. On the webpage, you know, you can call any of us. If we don't have the answer and somebody else in the program does, we'll make contact with them. You know, it's part of our job. You know, aquaculture can be a good thing, but personally, I think there needs to be some discussion around it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, definitely thank you for your time tonight.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Thank you.